See, let me tell you how I got involved in this, because this is kind of a far out thing there. I was asked to take over a wax class that George Bennett was teaching, and he's a Seattle person if any of you know of him. And this class was soft wax. It was the second in a series of 3 classes, and so it was green wax, green sheet wax, lathe turning hard wax into bezels, making prong heads, things like that. And then they had this textbook, and in the back of this book was this interesting wax. And it's Japanese, I'm sure, because the name Mitsuro was on it. So, but the formula for this wax said, take 5 oatmeal cookies, with or without raisins, and put in 3 macadamia, whatever, you know, and a few shortbread cookies. So we could not figure out what this combination was from the listing that was there. Things change, as you know, so these different products change. So it was a soft wax class, and I thought, okay, we're going to figure this out. I started calling dental supply companies and companies that supply wax to sculptors, industrial wax companies, and they're kind of the same thing, really. Some of them cross over. I ended up with a company in California called McLaughlin, and they sell to sculptors. They're also industrial use waxes. Got a guy there who just got really interested in this, and he had a lot of contacts in the industry, and they make their own waxes. They used to have a jewelry department, so they made sprue waxes and injection waxes. They knew everything about waxes. So it was ideal for me. He started sending me samples. He knew what some of these waxes in the original formula did and what kind of combination we were headed for. You have with the waxes a melt temperature, you have a congeal temperature, and the congeal is very important because when you do the designing you want it to hold shape. So sometimes the numbers on these change, you know, they upgrade or they change the formula a little bit, but there may only be 3 degrees difference in the temperature. So for our purposes it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So pine resin. I have been buying this from, I'll just send it around, Daniel Smith, and if you will wait to crunch it into little pieces until the last person gets it. You know how kids punch?
We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's all yours. You know, you give kids bubble wrap in there, you know. And this is the sticky wax. This is what you sprue with, you know, that, not the pink rods or the blue rods, but a lot of times you have this and you put it on to do the fillets and so on.
In casting.
In casting. This is the patch wax. It's extremely soft. When you make your own formula, this recipe makes about a small wax pot. It'll make a full pot. So it's really one batch. Of course you can make less. But if you're going to spend the time on it, you might as well make one batch, pour it out into something, and if you remelt it later, then remelt it. The remelts go very fast. The original maybe takes 2.5, 3 hours. So the melt temperature on the pine rosin is the highest, but you don't put it way up to the melt temperature. Get it so that you are melting it and it gets gooey, but it won't really be melted. If you start to smell it way too much, you have it too hot. And you don't want to ever see vapor or anything coming up. When it starts to get gooey, you dump the other one on top.
What are you making with it?
A little wax pot.
A little wax pot.
I used the wax pot that you use. It has a little injection thing on it. And ultimately, I bought just a wax pot.
Real
Mine is ProCraft, and I got it from Grow Bay. I think you'd have to check the catalogs. It was around $100 or $80 or something. It doesn't have the pressure thing on it for injecting, so it's cheaper. Although one of them that I ordered, these are cast, and they hadn't cleaned up the interior of the casting. It was terribly bumpy. And that's just going to give you trouble. It's going to collect all kind of garbage.
So what you put first, the pine?
Pine rosin first.
Or is this recipe on the CD that you're giving us?
Yeah, it's in the back here. And it took us maybe 3 years to finally come up with this, on and off, you know, it kept. Anyway, when you put the sticky wax in, it's a lower melt temperature than the pine resin. It'll melt more when it starts to melt, start stirring the two together, and the whole melt temperature will start to go down. And the pine resin, you'll notice, this is how you get some of that linear, because it makes threads. When it starts to melt and you pull it out, you get threads. So that's part of the process of this. Anyway, get the sticky wax in, start blending it. When it is melted, you can tell, because your stirring rod will come out clean. You can feel the bottom and edges of the pot that you're using, and it looks liquid. Don't get it so hot that it shouldn't be like even a scented candle. I mean, you'll notice a scent, but it shouldn't be anything strong. If it's getting a strong scent, you have it too hot. Just back off on it. But you want it hot enough that you can pour it. So you'll be able to tell when it runs clear. When it gets clear and it's all together, just let it soak. And you want that pine resin to get all melted. And it's a little touchy that way. So I tried taking the pine resin up to temperature it melts at, what, 170, 180, something. It's fairly high. And it's just not good to do that. You end up with more of a burn problem when you add the other waxes to it. So anyway, you'll be able to tell. For a stirring rod, I use the glass rods for casting, but you could use a stainless ice teaspoon, something like that. And when you first start to stir it, the whole thing will get gobbed up. But as it heats up and gets more even, it'll come off and clean up. So last thing you add, when you have that all ready to go, add that pink at the end. It melts very fast, and it does volatilize, so you don't want to lose that. So usually I turn the temperature off, but if you're in a cool climate like we are this year in Seattle, you might want to leave the pot on for a while. Get the pink, but don't walk away from it for an hour. I mean, that's a mistake. So put the pink in at the end. I should say it's salmon. Salmon. In at the end, and when that is melted, you will be able to tell. Then you pour. You will need hot mitts to pour because your pot will be hot. But couple of things to pour it into. For a long time, and I still do use, I have a little Pyrex rectangular casserole, I guess you call them, small. And if you lay foil over the top, flip it up, put foil over it, and then turn it, put the foil on the inside, it's pretty easy to do. You need to pour it into foil or the new silicone bread tins. I did that this time. And they've been fine, because I poured this wax maybe 5-6 times, and those held okay. The problem is they're kind of big. And you can't really use muffin tins or anything like that, or the silicone ice trays, because you're going to pour it through a hoop with a nylon stocking on it. So you have to be able to put the hoop on top, pour through that, and your wax will be liquid enough. It'll go right through, and that'll take out any, if you have any little lumpies, that should take care of that problem. Or if there's problems with the resin, if you have a problem with this wax, it's going to be the pine resin. I mean, I can guarantee that. It's either old, and if you go to different suppliers for it, like the gymnastics, we were going through some of them yesterday. The strings people use them, violin. Some of the people who do woodworking. I buy it here from Daniel Smith. The printmakers use it for etching. But you want to have the pure form of the pine resin. You want to have it all filtered and cleaned up. If it looks too brownish or dark amber, like it has junk in it, then don't even buy it, because it's just going to, the wax will not do what you want it to do. You shouldn't have any problem with this formula. And once you get it made, it'll store. The other waxes will also store. So, thanks to McLaughlin and the person there, they of course have been bought out. And now, not only bought out, but now they use a distributor, and it's in here, for small amounts of the two waxes. So you don't have to buy 60 pounds of it, or 300 pounds of it. So anyway, all of that is in here. So what I'll do is go through with this. You need a clean area. Get your hands washed. This wax picks up dust. It's a dust collector. And we'll see if this will work today. Yesterday we had a lot of trouble. No, this maybe this is going to work. Water on your hands. People cringe when I say water and wax, but nothing else works. I've tried a lot. Now this may be super sticky. It's going to be good. Yeah, we tried this hot plate for the first time. I tried a buffet server warmer that you put stuff on. It's too hot. But you may have something, if this is going to work low temperature, I usually at home I just put it under light, and you'll get used to using your own system for whatever you're using to heat this. You want even heat through it, and as you heat your bar, where do you want me? Tell me what's good.
That's good.
This is good?
This is the finished wax?
This is the formula, yeah, the three together.
You're heating it up in a Pyrex station?
Well, actually, we have it, because it was getting too hot, Nadine rigged up a foil ring, and we have foil on top of that and the wax on.
The reason I say is if people are going to use Pyrex, look in the old reused places.
Yeah.
No Pyrex. The new Pyrex explodes.
Oh,
Yes, there have been many instances of it exploding, so.
this is not directly on
It is my mother's set.
the Pyrex. See, it's cooling already. When you heat it up, you can kind of see it getting a little bit translucent. You want it even through. And if you have a cold spot, it will resist you pulling it. And it's already starting because the air, I'm going to see if we can get the, that's not going to help any either, is it? I have the table set up in the back side there so that when you have time, you go back and try it. And we won't get it here very good just because of our situation, but when you do this at home. Now see, I'm getting thinner because these edges are cooler. The two ends are cooler. So I could put it under. We'll try to get another one going. But anyway, pull it to double, fold it over.
Can you put it in warm water to warm it? Or?
I don't think you want to have the water on it. You can put it in water to cool it if you want to cool it quickly. But you get the idea. I'll try another one. We'll get some going here. See, this is cooling already. I'm just going to put it back on here. We'll try this one. But this is working. See, now it's going to stick to me, so water is. And I did bring, if you really get a sticky batch and it completely messes up your hands, I brought some Crisco. It's over at the sink. Crisco takes everything off. I use Crisco for a lot. I use Crisco for oil paint, and it's kind to your hands. Okay, let's see if we can get this one. When you get it even temperature, see now, see that move? It's still getting a thin spot, but I'm just going to keep it going. The pine resin will do its own thing, and you will get more lines than the folds you put into it. Still not a very good strip, but you can get the idea of it. We'll do another, get some.
The idea of this technique is to get those.
Do you want to pull it out? You want the linear, see if any of these have warmed up enough. I know we can get it though, so that's good. Oh, here's a warm one. This was under the light. This is almost too warm, but you can see what I mean about. See if it sticks to you. See if we can get one really going. And just in case, because I anticipated we might have a problem with the air temperature. I brought some strips that I already pulled at home, so I have plenty for you to play with, and there's plenty of samples. You should be able to take some home.
You were telling me that back there you have softer and harder. What, in the recipe, what makes it softer?
The U27, the pink, you add different amounts. What I did on this, the original recipe called for, formula or whatever you want to call it, was volume. And that was another interesting problem because we had this wax pot, so we figured out the volume of the wax pot, and ultimately we put a ruler in it, and as I added things to the wax pot, I weighed them. So it's easier to just weigh out this stuff and then add it than it is to do the volume. But the difference in the formula is the pink is soft. If you get it too soft, my feeling is you don't want to go over what we've recommended because you make your design, then you want the design to hold for you. You don't want to just start to slump. And that can be a problem if you're working near a light or something like that. It'll slump on you. So if you get it too soft, that's not good either.
So the recipe, is it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? Or what?
No.
Portions? Or is it on the...
It's on here, yeah. It's all on here. Put this under the light again. I sent out CDs to these suppliers, and it's interesting, I haven't heard anything yet. 245 grams of the sticky wax, 215 of the lump pine resin, and 5075 of the pink. So I put them in order of the weight, but you will start melting with the pine resin just because it's the higher temperature. And it just seems to be better that way. You don't want to overheat the lower temperature waxes, you know, to do it. Are we getting any place here? Oh, this one might work. I have to move quickly or we're not gonna. Anyway, have water, have wax paper. It'll stick to everything but wax paper. So wax paper is the one, don't use a foil. I mean, you can use a foil to store it in if you want, you know, wax paper, and then seal it up or get tins or whatever. Places at, you know, holiday time will sell tins for cookies and things like that. You can get some tins and just seal everything up. See if I can do this. That's not going to help you though. But if you get a cold spot, it's going to sit like a lump, and then you can just work it under the... I try not to get my fingers on it because it'll pick up fingerprints. So if you can get the temperature going through it just right, it'll just pull out, and sometimes you can hold it up and it'll just keep going. Just gravity will do it. See, now I have that lump in the middle that's hot. I mean, it's cold.
Does the linear pattern from the picture just automatically happen, or did you carve it? That's just automatic?
That kind of happens from the pulling, and you see it getting... I would say, though, the more times you fold and pull it, the more fine the linear becomes, and you almost lose it. It's not that you can't work with the wax, but if you want the design, 4 or 5 times is enough. Now this is moving, it's just not a real good piece. But if you get the temperature correctly, it'll do it. And I save scraps. These can all be remelted. Remelts go fast. I mean, 15, 20 minutes for a remelt as compared with a couple hours. Well, final attempt here maybe, and I'll take out the strips that I don't know, Nadine, if we should start another one or spend our time on something else. It's so much fun. The thing is that it designs itself. You know, you get this strip, wide or narrow or whatever it is, and you can bend it around. It likes to twist, it likes to curl. You can put one through the other. Just things that you can't do even with wax wire. And it's much more interesting. Like the pendants I've made have all sold, and some of them are real simple with just a freeform pearl on the end, or a simple dangle thing. And I think it's because it just has a lot of character to it. Whereas if you do one of hard wax that's kind of smooth and slick or whatever, this just has more movement. And interestingly, with custom work, like you do 3 rings and you let them choose one, that type of thing, you still have 2 rings left that you can use. If I do something symmetrical like in a pendant, because a lot of the business ladies like to wear pendants, and it's sometimes a little more conservative group, they almost always will go to the more freeform one at the end. They'll take, you know, you do one that's a little more offbeat. Oh, this is the one I want. And then they, well, you know, 20 minutes later, they usually choose the one that's a little more arty and fun. So that's a good thing.
For ring, do you form it around a dowel, or, and then do you have to put the wax paper on the dowel so it doesn't stick?
Yeah, we'll get into that. Let me see if I can at least get one working here.
I wanted to ask you about that. You said not to put it in warm water because you don't have the water on it. Like you're using water in your hands. So.
Yeah, but you don't get so much on. I don't think I would dip it in warm water to...
It's just very even.
You could try it. You want it even. But sometimes when you're designing with it, you want it to cool quickly. You can dip it in cool water to cool it, so it doesn't do funny stuff on you, you know. And the interesting thing with this folding over and everything is that you don't trap air. I have not had any problems with something exploding in, you know, investing.
So what's your setup at home?
My setup at home is a light, just a light.
Just like that.
And you just kind of get used to the tolerance and how much time it takes. And of course, warmer weather is helpful. But if you're in a hot climate, then you're going to have the air conditioning. So you're just going to have to learn what works. I mean, that's what really comes down to it. You'll have to play with it. But it doesn't take very long. So here's a strip. Tools are very simple. I'll put a couple more in here to melt while we're just doing this, so we have some ready for you. After you do the pour into your container, I would say half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour. If it's in a silicone one, you can just pop it out. And I pop it out onto just one of the cutting boards, you know, the plastic cutting boards. I put it on wax paper, always wax paper. And take your chef's knife, cut it up. Or you can score it and break it later. But really, if you're going to be at home for half a day making this, you might as well just do it. Because once it's cut, it's just so much easier to deal with. Otherwise, you can take it into the garage and whack it with a hammer on the concrete floor and break it. But you know, if you want to just kind of cut it up, I would say half an hour, and take your chef's knife and or whatever big knife you have, run it in water, run it in cold water, because the middle, you know how it is, the edges will cool quicker, and the middle will be softer, and sometimes it's not ready to be cut yet, and it'll catch on the knife. So the water does help. I mean, it's just an interesting little thing.
Can you maybe pass around a couple samples that we could see more close up, like maybe a good and a bad, so we have a better idea of what you're excited about and what you're disappointed about? Because, you know, the camera's not...
Yeah, I know. Well, and we'll get him back. I want to get going so we can get in the back. Because I have stuff for you to play with, and Let's see. I brought one someplace. I have one with little lumpies in it. It was a remelt. And the little lumpies just mean you need to let it soak a little longer. You can play with this as it goes around. These are all okay. Let me set a big one around, a bracelet type one. If I have one in here. Well, I don't have them that big. They're in them. Let's see if there's one in. Check in that white box, Nadine, the big long one. Yeah, see if there's a wide one in there on the bottom. Not really. Yeah, I'll just send that around. Anyway, I have a number of these strips, so you can still, if you can't get things to work real well, you can still play with it. The thing now when you get your strip is you need to have it, and even your hands will warm it up, you need to have it soft enough to work with. Now one thing on these strips, sometimes because of the way you fold it over, the edges will get thin, and you need to watch that, especially for rings. So that's uncomfortable. If you have a sharp edge knocking against your finger. The other thing I found with the rings is that they almost always come out a bit size bigger. And I can't figure it out. I've got all my ring mandrels, for those of you who don't have one, that you can build on. But I think it's because they aren't even and solid. So they go over your knuckle differently than a solid form ring. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't think it's stretching as I'm working on it, because you can get it pretty disciplined that way. But if you make a ring do it a half size smaller, you can now stretch it a little bit. It's been an interesting pattern, and I can't quite figure out why, except that the material itself is just not flat, you know. And your design won't be completely flat either. On a ring, you're going to go back and forth and up and down. Okay, now on this one, I'm going to take this edge and draw it. Another thing you can do for ends, other than cutting them with an X-Acto knife, see, and I've made a point on it. If you twist it, you end up with kind of like a wire. So this is real high-tech stuff. Dowels with wax paper on them. And I'll try to hold my hands down. I know I'm being naughty. Third hands are helpful, having a third hand, especially for bigger pieces. The ring mandrels come sized. For bracelet mandrels, you can use mandrels that are iron, you know, metal ones, but they cool. It will cool the wax really fast. So if you want it to keep position, that's fine. But if you want to play with it a little bit, it can be a problem. So the ring mandrels work really well because you have the sizing. You can turn them. You can take them off. In the back room, I have one of the wood mandrels for making wax rings. It's a wood one. Those work well. And there's also a wood one that has metal sheath on it. That would work. I always put your wax paper around it. Now on something like this with a wax paper, instead of doing a big strip and having a seam across it, do a strip about this wide and put it on the diagonal going around it. You have just a little bit of tape on it. The clear tape, for some reason, works better to hold your wax paper than the, you know, the nice package tape. I'm not sure why that is. Anyway, these come in the commercial toilet paper rolls. And they're just perfect. They also come, like places like IKEA use them as separators. And what you can do is cut it on the diagonal. Don't ever cut it straight across, but you can size these. So if you're making a bangle for somebody, here's one that's been sized. Take your hot glue gun and clean off the front and put your wax paper on it. This is balsa wood from the hobby store. It comes in squares and different lengths, but a foot or whatever. So you can file this, and it's very lightweight. You can get it to the size that you want. And it's firm enough for what's going on here. It works really well.
Sorry, what's that one?
Balsa wood. Hobby shops.
And the ring mandrel?
The ring mandrels are metal. They come different sizes. Some of them have a whole size and a half size on one
Supplier?
buy. Oh gosh, they're all over. I just go into the catalogs. Yeah. It'll be under wax equipment probably. Okay, let's do something here. Is this showing up? What height? Lower, higher?
It's just coming straight down when you start talking, yeah.
This is a long strip and I may not use the whole thing. Okay, we're going to do a droopy pendant of some kind. A shell form. A shell form look-alike. It loves to twist. Any metal will cast. Silver needs to be a little heftier, just because of temperature control. Is this showing up at all?
Yeah.
Well, I'll pass it around. I mean, that's not a problem, but... And you don't necessarily have to do everything in one piece either. You can join pieces. You know, it's just a creative thing. You can pile it up however you want. Let's see, I'm going to cut this now, and I can cut it right on the mandrel on the back side. Or else you can taper it again with your fingers. Another good way to taper a piece of wax is to take, let's see if we can get something good looking here. Tuck that one that way. Play with it as it goes around, see what happens. You can twist, and if you want to taper an end off, you end up making it into a wire, and you can just pull it so it gets more tapered and more narrow to make an ending for a piece. That's pretty reliable. The one thing with twists, I mean, it's just a bunch of fun. You can put one through the other. You can make a loop and thread it back through itself. That's a lot of fun for rings. These are perfect for rings when you want to set your mother's or grandma's stone or small stones. Do any of you do casting stones in place at all? It's perfect for that because you almost have a channel setting here. I made a bunch of buttons once. Yeah. Let me go through some of this other information. How's our melting doing? Does somebody want to come? Ooh, somebody want to come get a piece and play with it? You do it instead of me. Here's water right here, and
Probably the more melted one, or
well, it doesn't matter. See what it feels like. This one's too hard.
this one looks like it feels hard too.
Is it? Are they hard? Mm-hmm. No.
I mean, it feels hard. It doesn't feel mushy. And they're
No, let me turn this up a little bit again. We'll just wait. We'll get some going in the back if we can. Otherwise, I have the strips for you. What I want to do, though, is go through some of this information. How many of you cast? Okay, centrifugal? Vacuum? Okay. I've done both, and I used to teach casting, so I have casting rules, you know. So if you run into problems, seriously, you can email me because I know what most of your problems are going to show up as. To join these pieces, one thing you need to think about is how is the metal going to move through this piece. And the further away you are from your sprue base, the more you have to think about that. What's really good about this wax is you have an automatic built-in thick and thin. Places that are thin in this wax will cast where you would never get it to cast in a regular piece, because the ridges act like little ducks and the metal just goes up. And rings are simple. The metal goes in, swirls around. With rings, I almost always put them on an angle. You want to keep the metal headed north, and it's just better. You know, the simple way is to sprue right into the bottom, boom, and go up to the middle, but you have to cut it off. And on some of these designs, getting into the top part, this is way over sprued. Could probably do that on one sprue. The only time you're going to need a couple of sprues is maybe shrinkage, or if the metal changes direction, like if you have your wax coming up and then it goes this way. Let me do one of those. If your metal goes, you know, the thick-thin rule, you have to sprue to the other side of thin. If you have an hourglass shape that constricts the metal flow, then you have to sprue to the other side of it. But you don't necessarily have to sprue from the sprue base up. That's a long rod sometimes. So technically your metal really doesn't know where your design starts and it lets off from the sprue. So if you can keep that metal moving, very often on a more complicated piece I take a little sprue and I take from the side of it and I feed it up to a special area just to get the metal up there, but I don't take it all the way back down. And technically that's a no-no. I do it quite often. You just don't want to have it pull metal away from something else. But you just pretend it's part of your design and cut it off afterwards. I sprue to sides whenever I can. Yeah.
Sprue to sides?
To sprue to the sides of this stuff.
To the edge, you mean?
To the edge. And if you have things on an angle, it will go up and this way at the same time, rather than up and have to go, you see what I mean, even on a ring. I'll show you what I mean. I'll coil one of these around. And you can coil this over a rod or...
How do you treat the base, like on that ring you have it sprued on your texture? How do you treat that afterwards? You just carve into your metal?
Yeah, you can go in with a graver, but if you can avoid it, I do a lot more spruing to the sides than I used to, because to the edges. Okay, let me just get something here. Do a corkscrew down here and make it into a wire. Okay, now if you have anything like this where you want the metal to go this way, or it doesn't matter how you are going to do it, but this change of direction could give you trouble, especially if it's big. Like if you're doing a bracelet and you flip it over and your piece is this wide, the metal doesn't necessarily like to change direction. So if you have several of these spiral things, you're going to have to sprue up to this, for instance, or up to this side of it, because the metal will sometimes quit on you and it might cool before you get that accomplished. So that happens a lot at tops of rings. But rings are so little, it still isn't usually a problem. They're very close to the entry point, you know, but the metal will come up and then you want it to go this way. That's why if you put it on a slant, it's always kind of headed north. It just seems to work better. And you don't lose the detail if you sprue to the edges. It helps with vacuum investing. The bubbles will come out so they don't get trapped under this texture. So that's just always a good idea to do that. Now on a longer piece, there's always a question of, well, do I sprue it up from this end and put 2 on it, or I do 1 on it, 1 bigger one on it. If you have finer sections that are thinner, you know, if you take your gauge and you measure them and they're thinner, but you can usually just eye it. The finer has to go the furthest away from the sprue base. It's kind of opposite of what you think, because as your flask fills up with the metal, the air doesn't move out as well. So you have to get up to the finer first. And then as it backs off, the pieces can be bigger. And I do that for detail too. A lot of the spruing on rings, they want you to do them upside down because of shrinkage. I almost never do that. I put my focal point the furthest away, and I get the metal into there first. Now, one problem that centrifugal casting has, and even these designs, because of the way the corners and the curls come together, you don't have fillets, smooth little fillets every place. You can fill them with Elmer's glue if you want, but often in casting, these real fine corners of investment will break off. When the metal goes in, they'll break off. And centrifugal has more force to it, so it's more of a problem. And they'll float up on the metal. They'll paste themselves at the top of the mold, so when you get your piece out of the pickle, it'll have little angular pits in it. There'll be squares, there'll be triangles. I mean, they end up having a very special pattern, and they'll be on the top of where the metal came up. That's from investment breaking off. And I don't know how to tell you how to avoid that with this work. If you have pieces you think sections are too thin, run Elmer's glue down it. If you want to fill in a little divot like that, what works really well, I save all my broken saw blades, and you can pick up a little bit of glue on that, drop it in, just a drop. The glue will dry, let it though dry till it's clear, because you want to invest it. And when you invest it again, it's going to get that whitish, even though it's hard, you know what I mean, it turns that whitish. But investing is what, 10 minutes? It's not a problem, it'll hold for you. And the same if you have an area you think is too skinny, run some Elmer's glue down it. You can even thin the Elmer's so it really runs well. I've tried other things, other kinds of waxes, and it's just not good to handle this too much. So those are a couple of casting things. The other thing that happens with centrifugal is you get turbulence porosity where the sprue comes into the piece more than you do vacuum casting. Is just a little easier. So if you get a pocket there, more than likely you're going to have a problem because of the way you do the spruing. You cannot overkill this work. You need to drop the wax in between the sprue and the piece. Don't touch your piece. And I do that. That's just a rule that I do on everything. I don't touch the piece. So you'll have to bend your sprue rods at a time, because if you try to bend them after they're on your piece, guess what's going to happen? Your piece will snap. It's cold, and if you put tension on it, it's going to break. Doesn't take too much to break it. So think about your spruing. Bend your sprues. And we don't have room to, I didn't put my other wax pen in, but this one is great. $25 or something like that. Don't lay on it. I mean, just heat it up when you're ready to touch it and then take it off. I like to ball up the end, and very often I put, this is the sticky wax. The sticky wax congeals quicker than this does. So if you put a dot of sticky, I don't know if I can do it with this pen, but put a dab of sticky wax on the end of your sprue. Then when you come to spruing this on, you've got this on there. All you have to do is touch it, and it'll move out. Don't get too picky about your fillets. You want to have it in, but like if I have a big area, do the one part of it, go over and work someplace else and then come back again, because if you get this too heated up, it's going to distort. You'll see that happening. So when you get home and you get some pieces to try out, just try spruing things without anything that you really want to, you know, see how the waxes behave as far as temperature. But this is a really good way to do it. So then when I want to add it to, join it to my piece, and I lost one of my favorite things to use is a cork with a needle in it. So you can, if you're joining two pieces, you can hold one piece with the needle, and the hole you put in your piece is so small you won't notice it. Anyway, we will put this on a dowel with wax paper on it.
So can I ask the cork and the needle, so you're putting your item, the ring, or just right on the end of that needle?
Little pieces more, or little sprues, and hold it that way, and then, because your hands are, you'll have at least one hand free, and then you can put your, let me put this on the side here. This won't be done correctly as far as how we want to actually cast it, but see, that's too hot already. Just touch it.
So you're touching the sticky wax that you previously put on the end of your spoon,
Yeah.
and then stick it.
Oops. Oh, yeah, I'm not set up right to do this. Essentially, you're touching the sticky wax and just letting it fall onto the other one. But I have too long a sprue. We'll do some of that in the back. And another thing you can do is, I'll send some of these around. Is you can put a drop and push your piece right on it. Like you can put a little drop on your piece itself and immediately push your other piece right onto it. You know, it'll be like a little bead behind it and stick it together. Tiny. We want to get back there now and get going, but investing, always, 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 always a 4-minute mix. You will avoid so many problems if you do a 4-minute mix. Regular formula, don't do that. They have one that's called Delicate or something. No. Just use the regular formula, a 4-minute mix. You have a 10-minute work time. It's not a problem. You will not have any kind of separation if you do 4-minute mixes. So that is the best advice I can give you in your investing. Then the first vacuuming will be the one that takes the longest, depending upon how big your flasks are, you know, how much you're investing. When it bubbles up and drops, you're done. You can do it a few minutes after that, but sometimes if you have a big amount, it wants to overflow. People don't quite plan on that. So if that happens, just let it come up, drop it, release the vacuum, let it come up again until you see that it falls. The air is out of it when it falls. You're done. And a lot of the rules say, oh, do it for another 30 seconds. You don't need to do that. You're starting to boil water. If you let it go too long, it's going to spit, and you're putting problems back into it. So when your investment comes up and it falls again, you want to quit. You have time to put rods in if you're doing rods. Couple of the investment rules on this, the one ring that went around, you always want to pinch at the bottom. The investment acts as an insulator to your piece. And in this work, it's pretty important. So a pinch at the bottom, that sprue rod has to be 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch long before it goes into the sprue base. Cover your piece by 1/2 inch. If it's a big flask, maybe an inch, no more than an inch. You want to have, when that metal goes in, that air needs to move through the investment and get out so the metal can go in. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing centrifugal or vacuum. It's better to have an airspace at the top of your flask than to fill it all the way up. So an inch is all you should ever need for strength. And a 1/2 inch. I mean, kind of judge what your piece is. 1/4 inch, you're really calling it short, depending upon what it is. Vacuum can tolerate a little more. Steam dewax if you can. I do it on a pot on my stove. It's very clean. And if you steam dewax, this wax is soft. It comes out fairly, except you've got these designs going all over the place. But it comes out fairly well. It goes in the kiln then at 300. You have to hold it there so that your flask, your investment gets up to 300 all the way through the flask. It'll be pretty close to that because you will have steamed it, so it'll be 200, 200 and something. So you can put it in the kiln at 300. A rule on really elaborate work is for every inch diameter you hold it an hour. So just anybody do that? But if you're doing some of these more elaborate artistic pieces, you want to maybe keep that in mind. 700 degrees, the steam moves out. And that's important. People tend to whiz past that. But the more involved and the more detail and the thinner your pieces get, the finer the work is. You want to have that steam out of there. Then the higher temperature is where the carbon goes away. You won't have too much carbon because you've steam dewaxed. There will be some. But if you're doing a 4x6 flask, you may want to hold it for 4 hours and then you drop it back to your casting temperature. So there's a reason for these rules, and they can be cheated on a lot, but if you start to run into trouble, then you need to rethink what you're doing. Because little things like that on these more elaborate pieces can make a big difference. So let me see if I've covered most of the basic. Because I really want you to play with this. We just have to get this going.
What did you mean by pinch on the top? What are you talking
You want to have, on the bottom of the sprue, there's that one ring I sent around that has the sprues on it. That bottom one you want to have long enough. It's real tempting to put your piece right down on top of that button. But what happens is that becomes the funnel then for the metal to go in, and it's cold there. Depending upon how you cast, that's a cold spot. So you want that, this one. This is the pinch right here. See?
Oh, you should be able to get your finger.
Yeah, you want to have a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch there. Because what happens is, not pinch the piece apart. We just called it the pinch because it was easy. If you can't grab it, what happens, see, it puts investment around the bottom of your piece. And this is a cold spot. So depending upon what you're doing, it's just really important.
And that's for each basic ring?
You can essentially do trees on this, but if you're doing custom work, like I'll do 3 or 4 at a time because that's usually what I have. You can they're little, you can put them in a flask together and set them up, or do 1 in the middle and 3, or however they work in as far as the design. Not a big problem. Now see, this I wouldn't do again. I would set this up on the edge. And if I had to, I'd bring another one up to the top for change of direction or shrinkage. And if you do lathe work of any kind and you do your own wax bezels, you get that all on ahead of time. Think about where your findings are going to go. You can't muck with this wax, though. It's not that you're going to be able to file where you're going to put a pin backing. You know, you can't touch it. You're better off doing some things in the metal. So. Cuticle scissors are great.
Explain again the inch on the investment and how much space you want to.
Yeah. You have to just think of your investment as, I need to stand here, as an insulator. So you want that space at the bottom, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch minimum. I mean, 3/4 is plenty. And your sprue rods will vary in thickness down there, vary in diameter. That doesn't really matter. 1/2 an inch between your piece and the sides of the flask. Sometimes if you're inserting rods, you might not get that every place, but think about that. Your rods don't have to be perfectly even, you know, they can be off by 1/4 an inch if you have to get it in position so you have that 1/2 inch between your piece and the sides. And at the top, I always cover the piece with a 1/2 inch to an inch. Some of that's for strength, but if you go over an inch, you're impeding the air moving out of that investment. And I did an interesting experiment because we were doing castings for the stone setting classes. And I had one pile that somebody brought me at the end, and there was real skinny rings. I mean, you know, a millimeter. They were fine rings. I already had the tree set up, so all the rings on the top were set up. They were heavier. Guess what didn't come out? Because the metal goes into the top. I mean, it was, I should have saved it because it was classic. It was theory classic example. The rings at the top, the metal went in, you know, you've got it this way. So the top is at the bottom. Metal goes in there first and it backfills. So it's cooler by the time it gets to the bottom, but that isn't the main problem. The problem is the permeability of that investment and the air moving out. So if you have pieces with detail, skinny, fine, they go at the top. Always, just do it. You will have fewer disappointments. The only other way around that is to sprue up to them, and you know, you don't want to get into that.
The top being the opposite end of the sprue, the top of
Yeah, the top when you're setting it up, and then it gets flipped over. So, and it's kind of opposite of what you think is happening. But the metal goes down there first, and then it backfills this way. And it, you know, in the vacuuming, it gets pulled out to the side. The other thing is, did any of you, were you around when Rio came out with a vacuum caster that had the coil on the dome? No, it was a really good caster, but there was all this tubing. All of that has to be cleared out before your piece gets vacuumed. That was for investing, but if you have a vacuum caster, make those tubes as short as possible. I mean, you can have a little extra, but don't have extra tubes there because all that has to be cleared out before your piece vacuums. So the quicker you can get that metal in there on your melt. The other problem I had once, I was going to try this casting alone and pulling it out of the kiln, putting it on, doing my melt, covering the flask on the vacuum caster, doing my melt, pouring it in. Not a good idea to put something on top of it because you can ruffle that investment and it'll go into your piece. So if you're going to do that, it is better to jack up your kiln temperature a bit to cover that time. It'll stay warm inside, but you're taking a risk if you put something on the top of it and you pull it off and you know what I mean, you're sanding the top of it and it can fall in. So I guess if you can be really careful and put a tile on it, like for instance, and then you lift that off, because that would keep your temperature. But I think you're better off experimenting with upping your kiln temperature at the end. Just count on, you know, another 50 or 100 degrees. So, well, let's get to the back. I want to see if we can get some of this wax melted. Otherwise, and I do apologize for that. You will know when you get it because it's just going to move. Fold it in half. I would say 4 or 5 times at the most. Will give you beautiful linear. And if you can get it to move and you're only holding the edges when you pull it, it kind of does its own thing. It'll put even more linear pattern in it to what your folds are. That's the fun thing about it. The wax just behaves beautifully. And then it needs to be just warm enough. If you see on your finished pizza you have a bunch of little cracks on a fold, a bend, and it's a tight bend, it probably was too cold and it didn't stretch. Like if you want to bend it around a toothpick, get a little coil or bend a real sharp thing for a loop to hang something on, something like that. If it wasn't warm enough, you're going to get you'll see the cracks in the final casting. I mean, they can be soldered filled and things like that, but just get it warm enough. You can almost tell when you're working it, you know, it'll just curl for you. So let's go to the back. Let me see if there's anything else in here that you need. Transporting. If you don't do your own casting and you can't work on your piece and cast in the same location, it would be valuable time for you to learn how to sprue. Otherwise, put your piece on wax paper in a box. If you need to cover the top with wax paper, you don't want to put pressure on it. Put it in a cooler so it doesn't rattle around. You don't necessarily have to have an ice pack in there unless it's 90 degrees. Transport it that way. You have to be careful because when the wax gets cold, it'll snap. So sometimes you can put pins in to keep it from shifting. Usually though, if you have it in some kind of cooler type of thing and put it on the floor. Don't put it on the dashboard of your card on the sprue base already, because it'll be gone. It'll just melt into nothing. If you can sprue it up, then put it on, you know, transport it on the base, even with a flask around it, to protect it, and just keep it from moving around inside your container too much. That's all. Keep it cool. Transport it that way. It's better if you can learn how to sprue it, but if you can't, then put it on the wax paper. The other thing is washing your model before you invest it. Tincture of green soap and hydrogen peroxide, equal amounts. A real soft brush. All the models you should do this with. This wax in particular is a little dust collector, and you think it's just wonderfully clean, but when you wash it with the hydrogen peroxide and soap, it just looks really good. Cleans it up really well.
Is that simple green? What is green soap?
No, tincture of green soap you can get from pharmacies. And, you know, a little bottle like this goes for eons. All your wax models, you should do that. Don't ever use debubbleizer. Give you all kinds of trouble. Clean it really well. Use a soft brush. You can rinse it in water this way, but what's happened is people get all of a sudden very vigorous and they knock it on the side and they break it. Cool water, but not too hard. You know, you just want to be real easy with it. Rinse it. If it's already set up for you, so if you have to wait till another day to start your investing, just put the flask around it and cover the top and put a rubber band on, you know, saran wrap or whatever, it'll stay clean. Now, if you don't use, I've always used the green soap, but just a mild detergent, you don't want it to bubble like crazy or, you know, be one of, like Dawn, the new Dawn is way too harsh, I think. It probably won't hurt it any, but just 50-50. Tink is hydrogen peroxide. Works really well. Cleans it up beautifully. All of your castings, really. That's the way to clean them.
Have you ever tried shooting this through a wax gun?
No,
See what happens?
I haven't. Well, you'd get wires. You'd get wax wires.
And they'd all be separated, or would they?
Yeah, you'd get individual wax wires. I mean, I've used the hot guns. I haven't used the glue gun, but there's hot wax guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It heats it up.
But you have to put a pellet in there. I think it would mess up your hot glue gun. I mean, the only reason to do this is if you want to get this linear design, really. It's no advantage to do this if you don't want that surface texture, really. So let's get to the back and get some playtime. And you all have, there's plenty of wax there for everybody to take some home. So please do that. The group from yesterday has already done some of that, so take wax home. We're going to take these strips back. If we can't get the wax to pull well here, which I'm guessing may happen, or we may get a few to work, play with the strips that I did already and just have some playtime with it. You'll get the feel.